Welcome to episode 2 of the Rewire. I am your host, Vanera. At the end of last week's episode, I made you a promise. I said we were going deeper into the patterns that survival mode creates over time. The ones that feel so familiar, so automatic, so much like you, that most people never stop to question them. And so today I am keeping that promise. But first, one quick note. Last week I mentioned 5 cycles. I have since added one more, the one that belongs at the foundation of all the others. And so today we are going through 6. If you listened to episode 1, you will see immediately why that first one had to be there. Now, I also want to be honest about something. These 6 cycles are a rewired framework. They are not a clinical diagnosis. They are not a published study. Listen, they are a map I built from my own life and from the patterns I see in the people I work with. I am sharing it because maps are useful, not because this map is complete or final. Use it to recognize yourself, and that is all a map is for. And I will tell you this, somewhere in these 6 cycles, you are going to feel seen. Maybe uncomfortable. But here is the thing, that discomfort is not a problem. That discomfort is the beginning of awareness. And awareness, as we said last week, is where every rewire begins. Let's go. Okay, the first cycle is the one that runs inside every single one that follows. I call it the reaction cycle. Here is how it works. Something happens. A word, a look, a silence, and before you have a single conscious thought about it, your body has already reacted. Your heart rate changes, your chest tightens, your voice shifts, or you go completely quiet. No gap, no choice, just reaction. And that matters, because this is the cycle beneath all cycles. Every pattern we cover today starts here. With a stimulus, the nervous system reads as threat, and a response that fires before the thinking brain has any say. We talked about this in episode 1. The amygdala fires in 250 milliseconds. The reasoning mind takes 500, and so the reaction is always faster than the thought. That is not weakness, that is wiring. But here is what makes it a cycle rather than just a moment. When the reaction happens and nothing changes, the nervous system files it as evidence. Evidence that this is how life works, that people cannot be trusted, that you always end up here, and next time the same trigger appears, the reaction fires even faster. The cycle deepens with every repetition. There is a quote from Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and one of the founders of modern psychology, that I keep coming back to. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that is what Jung was pointing at, the unconscious pattern running the show. The rewire begins the moment you see it. Not fix it, not fight it, just see it. Let me share something personal with you. I used to throw things when I was overwhelmed. I used to blame. And for a long time, I had no idea where that came from. No clear memory of learning it. I just did it, like it was already installed, like it had always been there, even as an adult, even when I knew better. Even when part of me was watching myself react and thinking, why am I doing this again? The reaction was always faster than the awareness, every single time. And what that taught me was this: you do not always know where a pattern came from. You just notice one day that you keep doing something that does not feel like the person you want to be, and you have no idea why. And here is what I know. That is not a character flaw. That is an inherited program running without a receipt. Now, science gives us three mechanisms that explain exactly why this happens. The first is mirror neurons, discovered by neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolatti in the 1990s. When you observe someone performing an emotionally charged action, the same neural circuits fire in your brain as if you were doing it yourself. Children's mirror neuron systems are highly active. They do not just watch behavior, they neurologically rehearse it. What the child sees repeatedly, the body learns to do. The second is implicit memory. The brain stores learned behavioral responses below conscious awareness. You do not remember learning to walk. You do not remember absorbing the emotional responses of the people around you in early childhood. Those patterns were encoded before the brain had the capacity for conscious narrative memory. The behavior is there. The memory of its origin is not. And the third is the theta brain state in childhood. Before age 7, the brain operates predominantly in theta waves, a deeply receptive state. In theta, everything in the environment is absorbed as programming. No filter, no critical evaluation, no choice. What the child sees repeatedly, it installs, not as a lesson, as a reflex. And so this is why you can carry a reaction pattern with no memory of where it came from. You do not need to remember the origin to break the cycle. You just need to recognize it is running and decide it no longer runs unchallenged. Okay? The second cycle is the emotional cycle, and I want to be honest with you, this is not what most people think. Most people assume the emotional cycle looks like anger, like explosion, like the person who snaps and then regrets it. And yes, that is one version, but here is the thing. There is another version that is far more common and almost never talked about. The emotional cycle can also run through beauty. Here is my personal experience with the emotional cycle. I do Facebook Lives, and sometimes in the middle of sharing something real, something painful, or something beautiful, the tears just come. Before I know it, before I have decided anything, I am crying. On camera, in front of everyone. And it happens with both things. With hard memories, yes. But also when I talk about my daughter. When I witness something selfless. When I see someone step into their courage. Something in me opens and the emotion just arrives. Now, for a long time I thought this was a weakness. That I needed to be more controlled, more professional, more composed. That the tears made me look unstable. But here is what I have come to understand. The emotional cycle in me is not about instability. It is about a nervous system that learned to hold feelings so tightly that when something real breaks through, everything comes with it. The body cannot distinguish between the beautiful and the painful anymore. They are all stored in the same compressed place. So here is how the loop works. An emotion rises, fast, big, overwhelming. You react, tears, shutdown, explosion, or a feeling so intense you do not know what to do with it. Then comes the self-consciousness. The thought, I should not feel this so strongly. And so you suppress it, push it back down, carry on. And because nothing was actually processed, because the emotion never completed its journey through the body, it stays, it accumulates. And the next trigger, even a small one, hits the same compressed place. The cycle runs again. Now, emotions are not just psychological. They are biochemical events in the body. When an emotion is suppressed rather than processed, the neurochemicals associated with it do not simply disappear. They remain in the body's tissue and nervous system. Over time, this creates a chronic background activation that lowers the threshold for the next emotional response. The body becomes increasingly sensitive, not less. And that is why suppression does not reduce the emotional cycle. It deepens it. Okay, the third cycle lives in the mind. I call it the mental cycle. And listen, if you have ever lain awake rehearsing a conversation that has not happened yet, you already know what this is. Let me share with you again my personal experience. Before any important meeting, before a presentation, before joining a new team or company, the mental cycle would start days in advance, replaying scenarios, running through everything that could go wrong, asking myself questions the future could not answer yet. What if they do not like what I say? What if I make a mistake? What if I am not ready? And here is what I know. The event had not happened. The threat was not real, but my nervous system was already in full stress response. Cortisol elevated, sleep disrupted, focus scattered. I was paying the biological cost of a danger that existed only in my mind. So here is how the cycle works. A future event triggers worry. Worry leads to rumination. The mind replays and rehashes. Rumination leads to catastrophizing. The worst case feels not just possible but inevitable. Catastrophizing leads to paralysis. You cannot decide, cannot move, cannot trust your own judgment. And so the paralysis creates more unresolved situations to worry about. The cycle feeds itself. Now, what makes this cycle so exhausting is that it feels productive. It feels like preparation, like you are being responsible and thorough. But here is the thing. The nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real threat and a vividly imagined one. It responds to both with the same cortisol, the same tension, the same depletion. You are spending real biological energy on futures that may never arrive. Okay, the fourth cycle is the most invisible one, and in my experience, the most costly. I call it the identity cycle. It begins with a belief, usually a belief formed early, in childhood, in a wound, in a moment of exclusion that the young mind turned into a permanent conclusion about who you are. Let me tell you something. I never liked my smile, even as a child, and from very early I was excluded. Other children did not let me play with them. I do not know exactly why. I just know the feeling of being on the outside, watching, not being chosen. And so I stopped trying to be included. I went quiet. I retreated into my own inner world, talking to myself, making up scenarios, imagining futures where things were different. Before I fell asleep every night, I would fantasize about my life, different versions of it, different possibilities. It made me feel happy in a way that the outside world was not giving me. And slowly, I started watching the people around me very carefully, using their lives as a mirror, seeing what they had, what they experienced, what was possible, and I would hold that up against what I wanted for myself. Now that quiet child who decided she was not someone people chose, she showed up decades later when someone said, "You should show your face on camera," and something in me said, "I cannot. I am not beautiful enough. I am too introverted. People will not want to look at me." The belief formed at 7 years old was still making decisions at 30-something, and that is the identity cycle. So here is how the loop runs. A belief forms. I am not enough. I am not someone people choose. I am not made for that. Because you believe it, you avoid situations that might challenge or expose it. Because you avoid, you miss experiences that would give you evidence to the contrary. And because you never gather that evidence, the original belief stays intact, confirmed, deepened. The story keeps proving itself right because you keep living from it. And here is what I believe. The cruelest thing about the identity cycle is that it feels like self-awareness, like you simply know yourself, like you are being realistic. But listen, there is a difference between knowing yourself and limiting yourself, and the identity cycle disguises one as the other so convincingly that most people never question it. Okay, the fifth cycle is the relational cycle, and I want to be honest with you, this one is delicate, so I want to speak about it carefully. The relational cycle is what happens when past pain becomes present protection, when a wound from one relationship becomes the filter through which every relationship that follows is assessed. I have had many relationships, and with most of them, I felt it, the incompatibility. Something in me knew, even when I wanted it to work, that this was not the right fit. And then once I fell in love, really fell. The kind that does not ask for permission, and it could not work. For reasons outside of what either of us could control, it just could not be. And so after that, I made a quiet decision. I told myself I did not need anyone, that I was happier alone, that relationships brought more complication than they were worth. And for a long time, that felt true. It felt like self-knowledge, like maturity, like I had simply figured out what worked for me. But I have learned to ask a different question now. Not, am I happy alone? But am I choosing solitude from a place of wholeness? Or am I choosing it from a place of protection? There is a difference. And here is what I know. The nervous system knows which one it is, even when the mind has convinced itself otherwise. Now, the relational cycle does not always look like heartbreak. It does not always look like someone who has been hurt. Sometimes it looks like extreme independence, like someone who has everything figured out on their own, like someone who simply does not need people. Because the most sophisticated version of this cycle is the one where the wall is invisible, even to the person behind it. Okay, the sixth cycle is the one I lived in the longest, the one that almost broke me, and ultimately the one that became the reason Rewired exists. I call it the energetic cycle. And listen, in the world we live in today, I believe it is the most normalized form of survival mode there is. I want to share something very personal with you. When I was working in France in software engineering, I developed a system, multiple browser tabs open at once. While one task was running, I was already starting the next one, always moving, always filling the gap between actions with more action. It felt efficient, and slowly it became so habitual that I stopped being able to do one thing at a time. The idea of waiting, of letting one task complete before starting the next, felt physically uncomfortable, like something was being wasted, like I was falling behind. I remember evenings at my desk, my mind wanting everything finished. Now, the impatience was not just a feeling, it was a pressure in my chest, a restlessness I could not settle. My mind was always 3 tasks ahead of wherever my body was. And I want to be honest with you, I did not call it survival mode. I called it productivity. I called it drive. I called it what ambitious people do. Until the body said enough. Until the sleep deprivation and exhaustion and impatience compounded into a state I could not push through anymore. And so I was forced to stop. Not because I wanted to, because my own biology finally overrode the programming. And what that taught me was this. I went back to meditation. I stopped with no deadline and no plan. and let stillness do what I had refused to let it do for years. And that is where everything changed. That is where Rewired was born. So here is how the energetic cycle works. Chronic stress depletes the system. Instead of recovering, you push harder because stopping feels dangerous, lazy, like falling behind. The pushing depletes further. The body moves toward burnout. Burnout eventually forces the stop the mind refused to allow. Brief recovery. And then the pressure builds again. The cycle restarts. Now, what makes this cycle so invisible is that our culture rewards it. We celebrate the person who never stops. We admire the full calendar and the relentless output. We call it ambition. We call it work ethic. We call it drive. But here is the truth. You cannot create a new life from a depleted nervous system. A body in chronic stress is a body in survival mode. And a body in survival mode cannot access the creativity, the clarity, the intuition, and the inspired action that building a meaningful life actually requires. Hustle is fear in disguise. Inspired action is trust in motion. Now, I want to explain briefly why these cycles are so hard to break. Because understanding the mechanism removes the shame from the struggle. Here is what science says. Every time a neural circuit fires, a process called myelination occurs. A fatty substance wraps around the neural pathway. It insulates it, speeds it up, makes it more automatic. The more a pattern repeats, the more myelinated the circuit becomes. The more myelinated, the faster and more effortless the response. And that is how any habit forms. It is also how survival cycles become identity. The emotional flooding, the overthinking, the self-limiting belief, the wall around the heart, the restless multitasking. Each time they run, they become slightly more default, slightly more you, not because they are you, because the brain has made them efficient. Now Dr. Joe Dispenza explains it this way. The same thoughts produce the same emotions. The same emotions produce the same choices. The same choices produce the same behaviors. The same behaviors produce the same experiences. And so the same experiences confirm the same thoughts. The cycle is neurologically self-reinforcing. It is not personal, it is physics. And here is what neuroplasticity tells us. The same brain that built those circuits can build new ones. Old pathways thin from disuse. New pathways strengthen with repetition. The survival cycle is not permanent. It is a habit. And habits, with the right tools and the right practice, can change. And that is not a motivational statement. That is measurable biology. Now before we close, I want to give you something to do. Not just something to think about. Something to do. Right now. The cycle recognition practice. I'm going to ask you one question. And I want you to sit with it honestly. Not quickly. Not with the most flattering answer. With the truest one. Of the 6 cycles we covered today, the reaction cycle, the emotional cycle, the mental cycle, the identity cycle, the relational cycle, the energetic cycle, which one do you recognize most in your own life right now? Not the one you have overcome, not the one that sounds most acceptable, the one that is most familiar, the one that has been running the longest. Now write it down, one word, one phrase, by hand if you can, and underneath it write this. This is a pattern, not my identity. A pattern I inherited, a pattern I can outgrow. And that is the first rewire. Not a technique, not a breakthrough, just seeing it clearly, naming it without judgment. That gap between you and the pattern, that is where your freedom lives. 6 cycles, 6 ways survival mode stops being a response to danger and becomes a way of life. The reaction cycle, the automatic response that runs before thought. The emotional cycle, the feeling that overwhelms before it can be processed. The mental cycle, the mind that exhausts itself on futures that have not arrived. The identity cycle, the belief that keeps confirming itself by shaping every choice. The relational cycle, the protection that looks like independence. The energetic cycle, the doing that never stops, because stopping feels like danger. And all of them are rooted in the same thing, a nervous system doing its best to keep you safe in a world it learned somewhere, sometime, was not entirely safe. Now, your challenge this week is simple. 1 cycle, the one you wrote down. Every time you feel it activate this week, do not fight it. Do not judge it. Do not try to fix it. Just name it out loud if you can. That is my mental cycle. That is my energetic cycle. 3 words. And that is the whole practice. Because naming is not passive. Naming is the first act of separation between you and the pattern. And separation is where choice begins. Now next week we stay in the diagnosis a little longer. Because before we can change anything, we need to feel the full weight of what staying the same is actually costing us. Not as punishment, as motivation, as the honest conversation most people never have with themselves. That is episode 3, and I promise you, it will be the episode that makes you decide. If today resonated, share this episode with someone who needs it. Someone you recognize in one of these cycles. Because sometimes the most generous thing we can do is hand someone a map and say, I think this might be yours too. Everything we talk about on this podcast lives deeper inside Rewired. The workbooks, the practices, the community doing this work alongside you. You will find it at school.com/rewired-8276. The link is in the show notes. I am Vanara Loch. This is The Rewire. Stop reacting to life. Start creating it. I will see you next week.